Noob School. All right, welcome back to Noob School. Today I've got my friend Charlie Hall. Charlie started and runs Upstate Warrior Solutions right here in Greenville, which is the largest veteran support group in the area. And I've known Charlie long enough to know that he's worked really hard to build it up into the organization it is today, being the largest and very well-run operation to take care of our veterans. So, Charlie, thank you for doing what you're doing, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, John.
Yeah, man. Well, let's go back to closer to the beginning, and we can work our way up to where we are today. But I know you went to West Point. Mm-hmm. When was that about? Roughly.
Well, even a year before that, I was I enlisted in the South Carolina Army National Guard my junior year of high school.
Okay.
My soccer coach in high school was actually poaching kids for the National Guard. I don't know if it was legit. But, I actually was a member of the Guard my senior year of high school as Private Hall, so it started even before that.
Okay. So what interested you in doing that?
It's funny. My brother was always the junior ROTC kind of guy. I was more the jock, and used to make fun of him for doing military stuff in high school.
Yeah.
And I think it was a factor of a couple things. One, I didn't really realize at the time, but I was had an entrepreneurial spirit. Did not really want to be beholden to anybody, especially my parents. So as I got into my last couple of years of high school, I was like, whatever it is, I want to do it on my own. I don't want to be, on their dime or beholden to them. And two, one of my role models was my Uncle David Hall. He's actually a civil engineer here in town. He was an Army Ranger, the classic, late 70s Army Ranger that got out and did great things in life. And he was just always somebody I looked up to. Mm-hmm. So again, this is pre 9/11. We're still in Cold War time. So I said, well, what better way than to kind of go out and do my own thing would be the military. Mm-hmm. That was what led me to the Guard, and then actually had the idea of applying to West Point. Pete Selleck, who's kind of a legend in these parts, he was he was with Michelin at the time, but his reserve job was helping kids get into West Point in particular. Mm-hmm. So a buddy of mine, we both got the postcards for West Point in the mail, and it said, go to Furman University for the kind of in brief, and we did, and he said, no way, hell no. And I said, that's actually pretty cool. So that was what kind of sparked my interest.
Interesting. Okay. So you had a role model, and then you got to talk to Pete. Pete was very helpful. And so then when you went there, roughly when was that?
Yeah, so 97 to 01.
Okay.
So again, just literally 2 months before 9/11 was when I graduated. Okay. It was a struggle. The South Carolina public school system, God bless all you teachers out there, but I was not well prepared for the rigors of academics.
Engineering, right?
Yeah, pretty much everybody at most of the academies is kind of in a baseline engineering curriculum.
Yeah.
I was an environmental engineer for a semester, and after a D and a couple engineering classes, I switched over to science. So was able to do something a little more general, but the academics were very, very challenging. I did fairly well on the physical and military side, but I literally almost failed out my sophomore year. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I've heard it's very tough. So you were up there, cold in the winter.
Yeah, South Carolina kid who had never been in any, 7-degree wind chill coming off the Hudson River. Yeah. So that was a wake up call. But it was a good experience. I grew up a lot. I think one of the benefits of the military, but also the service academies, is you're thrust in this environment that you can't control. You can't control who your, bunkmates are. So, I met kids from all over the country that that I'd never had any exposure to, folks that were very different from me and helped me kind of learn how to be a better person and be more well-rounded. So thankfully I graduated, branched combat engineer in the Army. But for the last 3 years of the academy, I was dating the Marine Colonel's daughter. So that was another thread of, so we got the Army, 9/11 just happened, Marine Corps, that's kind of an interesting outfit. So more to that story.
Yeah, yeah. So where did you go?
Yeah, so started out in the Army, immediately got married a couple weeks after graduation. At the Federal Service Academies, you're not allowed to be married there, so about half the class gets married within a month. And went to Fort Riley, Kansas, as a combat engineer platoon leader. Sounds a bit young and flaky, but after about a year at Fort Riley, again, 9/11 had just happened, so the Army's reeling from how are we going to now act in this new kind of desert special operations kind of insurgency fight as opposed to fighting the Soviet hordes. As an all-wise, 24-year-old, I called my new father-in-law, who was at the Pentagon. He's a Marine colonel. And I said, what are the chances of me switching over to the Marine Corps? Because Fort Riley and the Army sucks.
Yeah.
And again, he was in a position to influence it. And within about 4 months, I was doing an inter-service transfer. So this is late 2002, drove the 7-month pregnant wife from Fort Riley, Kansas, directly to Quantico, Virginia, reported into Quantico. And within about a couple days, I was like, this was a mistake because these Marines they're a different breed.
Yeah.
But buckled up for the ride. Ended up having a great experience in the basic school that the Marine Corps puts all their officers through. And the Marine Corps, in all of its wisdom, did not make me a combat engineer. They made me a supply officer, which at the time was somewhat of a letdown. But in the end, it worked out really well. I was assigned to a reconnaissance battalion deployed to Iraq 04-05, a 2nd Recon Battalion, and actually ended up doing pretty much everything but supply in Iraq at the time. Was able to draw on some of my combat engineering skills in a combat environment in Fallujah. So, it's funny how things come full circle and things work out for good.
Yeah, I love that. I love the couple of times you mentioned that something was a letdown or a disappointment or something. You just kind of buckled down and just kept moving forward. I think that's a good message for the for the noobs out there. Is you just gotta buckle down and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't always talk about it, but one of my biggest failures coming up through the military was in a school that was usually pretty simple to pass, and the last day of the U.S. Army Air Assault School, I left the helicopter early without being told to leave the helicopter, and was doing great all the way into the course. Last day, dropped for safety reasons, and it was crushing. I was a junior at West Point, and I've been, able to, tell younger folks about that, to say, hey, it was something that in some ways that could have, for the next couple of years, changed my trajectory just because I was so dejected about it. But my dad in particular was like, hey, listen, things like that happen. He told me about an experience he had that was, similar in the, corporate world, and said, you're going to screw up, dude. Like, you're going to fail. Yeah. So how are you going to not just pull yourself up afterwards, but how are you going to learn from it? So, I look back on that and I'm like, I was crushed. The world is over. Yeah. But it wasn't that big of a deal, but it really influenced kind of the way I saw myself and how I, the first time I had, significant failure in my life.
So how much longer were you in the service after that?
Yes, I did a total of 5 years active duty. So basically a year in the Army and 4 years in the Marine Corps. Got out in '06. I had done my time. I had married my wife, who was a career Marine's daughter, so she'd been pretty beat up by the military. And really at that time, '04, '05, '06, either her dad, her brother, or myself were deployed at one point. So we made a mutual decision to get out. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, and applied for construction project manager jobs in the Carolinas. So I was pretty insistent that Asheville would be the place for us, and this is '06, right before the recession. And my wife said, there's something about Greenville, South Carolina, that's like just really cool. It seems very family friendly. I had this image that we were going to be this outdoor family, like, rock climbing and camping with kids in tow, which, is never really realistic up in Asheville. So Doug Harper offered me a job at Harper Construction in '06. Actually, I told Doug that I wanted his job when after 20 years, which was hilarious. Whenever I see Doug, I'm like, remember I told you I wanted your job?
Yeah.
He's like, yep.
Business owner. Yeah.
So Doug I owe a lot to Doug and the Harper Corporation. They gave me a chance right out of the Marine Corps. I didn't know much about construction. And really, Harper's one of the reasons why I live in Greenville today. So really grateful to them for that opportunity.
It's a great company. And how long were you with them?
So I was with them for 3 years. 06, 07, construction's rocking. 08, 09 hit. I was one of the, young guys in the cubicle farm that was, really the construction was hit very hard during the recession. So I had stayed in the reserves to kind of have some control over my destiny and to fulfill my 8-year contract. So I was coming up on the end of my 8 years, and I asked the Marine Corps if there was anything I could do on active duty to basically give me a little bit of a reprieve from the business world. I was willing to, go to Quantico for a year if need be. They said, well, we actually have this new program with our Wounded Warrior Regiment, and we need a case manager in Greenville, South Carolina, or a case manager that could cover the Carolinas and Georgia. And I said, hey, I'm your guy. Yeah. So it was a huge blessing for my family and I, because with the economy and the shape it was in, with my career path in construction, I was able to go to the team at Harper and say, hey, I'm going to take a year. I'll be out of your hair. And I was able to do something really fulfilling. So the Marine Corps basically made me a social worker overnight. I always say they gave me a couple black polo shirts, a BlackBerry, which was pretty cool at the time.
Use the thumbs.
09 got the BlackBerry, and I think like 50 cents a mile to be reimbursed by the government.
That's pretty good.
And a caseload of about 100 wounded Marines and Navy corpsmen that had served with Marines over a 3-state area. So I was basically asked to be their big brother. So the Marine Corps said, we want you to get in these guys' houses. We want you to see their living environment. We want you to meet their families. And we want you to help them with whatever they need. So I saw the whole spectrum of severely wounded, wheelchairs, feeding tubes, to the hidden wounds of post-traumatic stress and drug issues, alcohol issues, inability to work, or folks that said they couldn't, but they could. And I was in a position to say, hey, listen, I got it, but like there's a whole nother life out there for you. So let's work together to get that job, to go to school, fix your marriage, develop a community around you. So that's really what got me to the work today, was the 08-09 recession, the Marine Corps giving me the opportunity to go back on active duty. So I did that for 5 years. Never went back to Harper. Love those guys. But it was an opportunity to do something that I was really good at. Didn't know I had a social worker bone in my body. But because I'd been in the Army and the Marine Corps, I had the ability to talk to soldiers, sailors, Marines. Being from South Carolina helped because I was in some little tiny towns around the state that you wouldn't normally go to.
Yeah.
And I had a kid living in a double-wide trailer in Barnwell, South Carolina, that had gone into the military to get away, and 3 years later, banged up, is now back, saying, "Hey, I'm 25. I'm now back. What's next? Like, how do I do this?"
Yeah.
So I had a blast doing it, and it really got me into this full-time nonprofit work.
That's great. And so after 5 years doing that, how did you transition from there to starting Upstate Warriors?
Yep.
Can you tell us how that worked, how you made that happen, how you got the initial funding and all that?
Yeah, well, so a couple things happened. One, I started meeting people in the community that were sending me soldiers, National Guard, Air Force. So I started to see all these other folks in need that weren't wounded Iraq and Afghanistan Marines, because that was a pretty narrow focus. So folks were saying, "Hey, can you help my brother-in-law who's retiring as an Army Sergeant Major get a job?" Also learned about just kind of some of the gaps in services with the VA. The federal VA does an awesome job with health care, home loans, GI Bill, disability checks. But when it comes to supporting families, when it comes to the employment path, starting your business, et cetera, that's where there's some gaps. So myself and some other veterans here in the community, Kevin McBride was at Prisma Health. Paul Howell was at the time working with Congressman Bob Inglis. He's now with Senator Graham's office. Those two guys in particular were folks that I met and was working with. And we said, what if we started something that was very boots on the ground, very community-based? The Marine Colonel father-in-law was retiring from the Marine Corps in 2011, had picked up his second star. He was an infantry officer and on the path to probably a third star, but got out and moved to Greenville because his parents were living up in Brevard. So these are my wife's grandparents. They were living up in Brevard, and he really needed to take care of them in their last years of life. So the general got out, moved into Greenville, and said, "Hey, Kevin, Paul, Charlie, like, I can provide some top cover. I can help develop a board. You guys are the worker bees. If we find some money, like, let's do this and let's hire some staff." So in 2012, we incorporated, and really for our first 2 years, 12 and 13, we were all volunteer, just trying this thing out for size. And then in 2014, the Wounded Warrior Project was actually developing community models around the country. So they selected 5 sites, Greenville being one. We arrived at the scene at the right time where they were selecting some sites, and it wasn't large metro areas. Charleston was one, Pensacola, Florida, Buffalo, New York. So we had the ability to get some seed money from the Wounded Warrior Project through a group called America's Warrior Partnership down in Augusta. And really they helped us for our first 4 years with grant money. There were strings attached. We had to raise a balance of, so we basically had a set budget, and so we had to bring money to the increasing amount of money to the table every year. And basically, as they were tapering us off from the Wounded Warrior Project money, we were building up that local community support. So over about a 5-year period, we became about $1 million nonprofit, had a staff of about 10, here we are today, 10 years later.
Yeah, and you've just moved into a beautiful building.
Yep.
How did you make that happen?
Yeah, so 2014, we got this grant from the Wounded Warrior Project. We hired 4 staff, and we said, let's do a bricks and mortar, and it wouldn't have worked. We didn't have brand recognition. People didn't understand how we were different from specifically VA, Wounded Warrior Project, much less some of the other nonprofits in town. So it really took about 10 years of just getting brand recognition, awareness of veterans issues. 2019, pre-COVID, we started just looking around town for some bricks and mortar. The key was the VA really wanted to be co-located with us. They said, "Hey, when you find space, let us know because we want to lease space." Because the VA is starting to see the value of this kind of public-private approach.
Yeah.
They realize they can't do it all on their own, and they've realized that it really takes the village, and really Upstate Warrior Solution is representative of that collection of village support folks. So we found 770 Pelham Road, which seemed a little big for us, 40,000 square feet. And really with some of our community partners and a few of my board members, they said, "Hey, we think we could fill this up." So we kicked off a capital campaign in 2021. The Hughes and Dow family kicked off the campaign with a large gift to name the building after Rupert Hughes. So that was really the catalyst for the fundraising. So we raised about $5 million over an 18-month period. And we're in the building now. So
it's beautiful.
40,000 square feet.
And you call it the Roop.
Yep. So Rupert was a telecom exec in New York City. And he really made his money flipping brownstones in Greenwich Village. And his daughter, Dorothy Dow, on city council, has lots of stories about working for her dad on the weekends, cleaning out rental properties. But in the end, it made him enough money and allowed his family, upon his passing, to be very generous to his college swim team and also local veterans efforts. So he just happened to end up in Greenville because that's where they lived. His daughter and son-in-law, so they made a large gift to us. So they called him Roop, so we call the building the Roop.
I think that's great. The Roop is awesome. And you've got I got the tour, I don't know, maybe a month ago, and I was there early on, I guess, when you were still working on it, but I got the official tour, and I couldn't believe how many partners you've got in there now. I mean, you're talking about a village. Must be, what, 20?
Yeah,
plus?
we've got about 25 partners,
Yeah.
and that ranges from 5,000 square foot modern real estate that is run by an Army veteran and his team of brokers, down to single offices and cubicles with kind of sole practitioners, veterans that are incubating their small business. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've got a lot of different folks in the building that are all trying to work together, kind of for the common purpose of helping veterans and their families.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. So cool you got that many different groups and people, and they're all trying to help veterans. It's wonderful. So anyone around here who wants a tour or see it, I highly recommend you go check out the Roop. Any sales advice or things you have learned, since you got out of the military, about like getting people to donate money to the capital campaign or decide to lease space from you?
Yeah.
Any kind of do's and don'ts you've learned?
Yes, I mean, a few that I've kind of referenced is, obviously it takes time. We thought we could kind of do this inflatable bricks and mortar on day one.
Yeah.
We realized that nobody knew who we were.
Yeah.
So nobody's going to give us any money
Yeah.
until we had an established brand, until we had an established track record of helping. So that was a big lesson for us, is we really needed to be able to have some time just to be known. That sometimes that's a luxury. We had the ability to operate without having a nice bricks and mortar like the Roop, but we would not have been able to raise that kind of money on day one. Two, it's about who you know. It's relationships. That's been something that tied in with that time thing, just having time and having relationships where folks can vouch for us. That's, the strength of our board has been something that I didn't see the value of until this capital campaign hit, and folks were like, you've had folks like David Wilkins and Smythe McKissick and Billy Webster and Lillian Brock Fleming on your board. I'm going to be much more willing to write a check because they're behind it.
Yeah.
Those have been a couple of things that have been really important to me to see that play out. And just, taking the relationships piece a little further. It's classic sales. It's just learning things about people, noting them, remembering them when you see them next. Actually having a good CRM. We keep all these notes in a Salesforce platform, and those are just like the basics of sales. Hey, met this person, remembering their name, remembering their kids' names, their birthdays, what branch of service they were in, what they do, and getting in front of them and just being able to listen to them talk about why their heart's into the veterans effort. I think in some of our early sales call with fundraising, we jumped too quickly into the ask. Hey, veterans, rah, rah, we need you to write a $100,000 check. We didn't really ever give them an opportunity to say why they love veterans, why they felt, called to do something like that.
You're projecting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I remember something you did well with me anyway, right when we first met, which was at least 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years.
But, I was getting involved in a veteran support group and helping a little bit. And you contacted me, introduced yourself, and said you'd like to meet and talk about how we might help each other. And you said, I'll come to your office. I'd like to bring my father-in-law with me, who knows something about the military. And so just the fact, most people would make that an email or a quick call or something. Can we work together? Can I help you? Here's what we do. I'll send you a PowerPoint. But you didn't. You took your time. You waited till I could do it. We met. You brought, this guy. When I shook your father-in-law's hand, I felt like I was shaking hands with a chainsaw. I mean, that guy had to scare you to death when you were dating his daughter.
Yeah, the chainsaw hasn't lost much of its juice after 10 years either. So,
well, anyway, I think that's another part of selling that you do well is like being patient and showing up and listening. If you're patient, you can build anything you want. It just takes time. And, there was a guy here in town who's passed away now named Tommy White. Did you know Tommy? You knew what he did? He was...
I knew of him, especially know his son, Brad.
Yeah. Well, there's a book on Tommy called Renaissance Man that you should read. But he had all these things he accomplished, and almost all of them took an average of 30 years. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
So when he was 50 and 60 and even 70, some of these things came to fruition. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, I think you do great at it, and I want to ask you a few more favorite questions.
Sure.
I know you're looking forward to this. Let's start with a favorite song.
Yeah, so always kind of been a country boy at heart. So always loved old country, but there's, I'd say I was actually listening to Merle Haggard in the gym today, stretching at the Roop.
Yeah.
So that's always a go-to. But there's a great song called "Cover Me Up" that a lot of folks have covered. But my 45-year-old senior moment's like now forgetting the artist. Okay. Anybody gonna help me? Cover me up.
Cover me up. I don't know. But I do like Merle Haggard.
Yeah.
He's kind of some combination between a talk and a sing. Somewhere in the middle there.
But I can really go anywhere with music. I'll listen to rap music cut in the grass, and one of my favorite jazz artists, John Sterling, downtown.
Now we're talking. Yes.
Occasionally pop up saxophone player downtown Greenville.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You get you a CD. What about a favorite book?
So again, the country boy coming out, I loved reading Louis L'Amour when I was a kid. And there's a one-off Louis L'Amour book called Last of the Breed.
Okay.
And it's not a Western, but it's an Air Force pilot that gets shot down in the former Soviet Union, and he basically escapes out of this military prison, and this like Inuit tracker tracks him across Siberia. And I read that guy probably once every 5 years. And my
Nice.
wife was like, "Are you reading that
You read it
that
again.
book you liked in high school?" But
Yeah,
loved Louis L'Amour growing up, and Last of the Breed. It's worth checking out.
that's good. How about a favorite movie?
Oh man, I have 3 teenagers, so we've been watching a lot of the old like 80s and 90s
Yeah,
kind of classics that every kid should watch. But loved basketball growing up. I know you're a basketball player. I was not necessarily gifted, but loved the movie Hoosiers. Like my brother and I watched it probably once a month growing up, and trying to get my kids to like it like me. They say it's too slow,
yeah,
but love Hoosiers, Gene Hackman.
yeah. Is that when they ran the old picket fence?
Yep, they ran the picket fence, and Jimmy gets at the top of the key and hits it every time.
Yeah. I love a movie like that. Rudy's also
Yep.
got a good ending, as I recall. What about favorite word?
I think it's a legitimate word, but it's used a lot in the military, and I use it a lot in my day job. But it's deconflict.
Deacon.
So, and I know actually your son Jack, who is a JTAC, probably used it a lot, but it's really used for like deconflicting airspace in the military.
Okay.
And I've always been trying to like deconflict things at work. And I think I was in a United Way meeting a few years ago and used it, and they said, "What does deconflict mean?" It's like, well, unconflict, like
Deconflict.
deconflict things.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if it's actually a word, but folks in the military use it a lot.
Yeah. I like the word. That's good. I like to make things simpler if possible.
Yep.
Well, I know I'd love to hear you do if you want to promote the ROOP, to say how people can get involved and be helpful to what you're doing.
Yeah, so 770 Pelham Road near Patewood Hospital. Rupert Hughes Veteran Center is 40,000 square feet. We've actually got an opportunity for folks to come in and have co-working membership. So we pretty much filled the building with the offices, but we've got lots of flex space in the building. So if you're interested, whether you're a veteran or whether you're a member of the community and not a veteran but just love the military, we've got co-working memberships available. So $250 a month gets you basically printer paper, Wi-Fi, bottomless coffee. You can work out in the ROOP gym. There's another great Sterling involved with the gym.
That's right. That's right.
John's son Taylor is our gym coach there. So we've got co-working opportunities, and would love to have folks from the Greenville community, especially if you live on the east side. That's something where it's very convenient, right beside Patewood Hospital. And then secondly, if you have veterans in your life, please tell them about Upstate Warrior Solution. Please ask them to come by the ROOP. We take walk-ins. Whether folks need anything or not, we want to get to know them, and we want to see how we can serve them and their families. So, please stop by the ROOP.
Well, outstanding and great job so far with what you're doing. We're proud of you and thankful that you're in Greenville doing it, and we'll maybe have you back in a year and do an update on how the metrics are coming along.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good.